You know, when we talk about violence, our brains, they usually jump to the cinematic stuff. We think of crime scenes, strangers in dark alleys, things that leave a visible mark.
Right, the external threats, the things we're all taught to watch out for.
Exactly.
Eh,
Stranger danger, right? But what if the most damaging kind of violence doesn't look like violence at all? What if, according to the work we're looking at today, it sometimes looks like dinner or church or just, the family business?
It's a startling concept to start with, isn't it? But it frames the whole tension of today's deep dive perfectly. We're all sort of conditioned to see family as this ultimate sanctuary,
Refuge,
a
yeah.
refuge from the world.
Huh.
But the source material we're analyzing, an article by Kandaya Ali called The Architecture of Exploitation, it just flat out challenges that. It argues that for many people, family isn't a sanctuary, it's a marketplace.
And that's the phrase that really stopped me, a marketplace, because that implies a transaction. It implies that people aren't being treated as, well, people to be loved, but as assets, assets to be leveraged. That's a heavy idea.
It completely changes the physics of the relationship. And Ali isn't just, listing complaints about difficult relatives. She's laying out a structural breakdown. She calls it the mechanics of exploitation. So we're not looking at why is this person annoying? We're going to unpack how families can become these rigid power structures.
And how silence becomes a kind of currency.
A currency, exactly. And what's really behind that metaphor of selling your soul?
What struck me, too, in the intro of this piece is the focus on proximity. We think danger comes from the stranger, the unknown. But the source points out that major organizations, like the Polaris Project, have found that exploitation almost always involves someone the victim knows and trusts.
That is the key. Proximity is the ultimate tool for control. Think about it. If a stranger tries to control your finances, your defenses go straight up. You see the threat.
You walk away. You call for help.
Right. But if a parent or a sibling does it, the defenses are already down because of that bond. So the source argues that the most effective control happens because of that closeness. Trust isn't just incidental here, it's strategic.
So let's unpack this shift. From sanctuary to asset class, the source draws a really hard line between a healthy family and an exploitative one. It's not just a matter of degree, it seems.
It's not. In a healthy system, the source says roles are flexible. You can be the strong one today and need support tomorrow. Conflict gets resolved without someone being, completely destroyed. But in an exploitative family, those roles harden into a hierarchy. It stops being an ecosystem and it becomes a regime.
A regime, that's a strong word for a living room.
It is, but it fits with the family systems theory that Ali references. And in this regime, you have this very specific cast of characters. It's almost like a script everyone is forced to follow.
Okay, let's run through that cast, because I have a feeling a lot of you listening might recognize these archetypes. At the very top, you have the dominant figure.
The authority that is never, ever questioned. They set the reality. What they say happened, happened. What they say didn't, well, it just didn't.
And then you get the silent enabler. This one fascinated me. This isn't the person doing the yelling.
No, and that makes them harder to spot. But the enabler is absolutely crucial. They might not be causing the direct harm, but their refusal to see it, to name it, allows the whole machine to keep running. They're the ones saying, oh, don't upset your father, or just let it go for the sake of peace.
For stability over truth.
Exactly.
And then you have the scapegoat. This is the person who just absorbs all the blame.
The designated trash can for all the family's negative emotions. If the dominant figure is angry, it's the scapegoat's fault. If the business is failing, it's their fault. They carry the family's shadow so no one else has to.
And on the flip side of that coin is the golden child. I always just thought of him as the favorite,
The one who gets the extra scoop of ice cream.
Yeah. But the source describes them as something more like a PR agent for the family?
That's a great way to put it. Their success validates the entire system. Look how great we are. We produced this perfect child. It masks all the dysfunction happening behind the scenes. It becomes the proof. We can't be a toxic family. Look at our golden child.
And lastly, the extended members, the ones who don't want to get involved.
And that phrase, don't want to get involved, does so much work. It sounds neutral, like they're just minding their business. But the source argues it's an active choice. By not intervening, they're upholding the dominant figure's power. They're siding with the status quo.
Okay, but let's get back to that marketplace idea. The source says these aren't just roles, they're assets. So if this is a market, what's being bought and sold here? What's the profit?
That is the critical question. For children, The source lists things like preserving the family's reputation, financial gain, or even the emotional regulation of the adults.
Whoa, emotional regulation of adults. Break that down for me.
It means the child exists to make the adult feel stable. If the parent is anxious, the child's job is to be calm. If the parent feels like a failure, the child's job is to succeed and make them look good. The child isn't a person with their own needs. They're an emotional support tool.
Oof. That,
Yeah.
that hits hard.
And for adults in the system, it's often about inheritance control or free labor in a family business, or simply enforcing silence to protect property or status. The classic, if you speak up, you lose everything.
There's a quote in here that really gave me chills. It takes that old saying, blood is thicker than water, and just flips it.
It does. The source argues that in this context, blood becomes the glue that seals silence. It makes the harm survivable for the one causing it because the victim feels bound by loyalty. But it makes it devastating for the victim because they feel like they can't escape.
So the currency being used to maintain all this is silence. Let's dig into that. The economics of silence. The source is very clear. Silence isn't passive. It's not just doing nothing.
It's absolutely active work. Think about the energy it takes to keep a secret for 20 or 30 years. The source asks, why do families hide abuse? And the answer is simple. Because exposure destabilizes the entire structure. The currency they're protecting is their social standing, their religious authority, their financial continuity.
And the source draws a parallel to the Roman Catholic Church with the institutional cover-ups.
Yes, and that comparison is so important. We can look at a huge institution covering up abuse to save its reputation, and we get the mechanics of it. We see the chess moves, the hush money, the PR. The source asks us to just scale that dynamic down to the family dinner table. The pattern is identical. Silence protects power.
And that's where we get those phrases we've all heard. We don't air our dirty laundry. Or even, oh, that's just how he is.
That is what the source calls normalization. And it argues that this is the most dangerous phase. When you say you're just being too sensitive, you're not just being dismissive. You are engaging in what it calls moral erosion. You're slowly dulling the conscience of the group to keep the system running.
And it doesn't start with a bang. The source talks about grooming for compromise. It's subtle.
It has to be, or people would run.
Yeah.
It's incremental boundary erosion. It starts with a little joke that goes too far, a secret you have to keep, just keep this between us. Then it moves to a small lie, then a threat. And each compromise makes the next one just a little bit easier. By the time you realize what's happening, you don't see it as abuse, you see it as loyalty.
And that is the trap. Speaking up feels like betrayal. Which brings us to this really provocative section, selling your soul. Now, my mind immediately goes to, deals with the devil at a crossroads.
Right, the supernatural. But the source is very firm on this. It says we need to strip away the metaphor. Selling your soul isn't a supernatural event. It's a psychological contract. It's the moment you choose power over your own integrity.
So that feeling of being too deep to leave, that's not some spiritual debt.
No, it's entrapment. It's reinforced by the fear of exposure. The source calls it escalation psychology. It's like the sunk cost fallacy, but for your morality. Once you cross one line for status or money, your safety depends on silence. And to keep that silence, you have to compromise more and more and more. You don't sell your soul in one big transaction. You surrender your agency in 1,000 small ones.
And the result isn't damnation in the afterlife, it's moral injury in the here and now. That's such a useful way to frame it.
It is. But while the perpetrator is dealing with that moral injury, the victim, especially the scapegoat, is facing something the source calls social execution.
Social execution. That sounds final.
It's designed to be. For the system to stay stable, someone has to be labeled the unstable one. Someone has to be the bad one so the leader can be the good one. They become the liar, the dramatic one, the crazy one.
The black sheep.
Exactly. And that role absorbs all the scrutiny. If everyone's focused on the scapegoat's problems, they aren't looking at the real abuse. The tactics are gaslighting, rewriting history, character assassination.
There's a line. The body remains. The narrative is stripped. That is a terrifying thought, like being a ghost in your own life.
It's described as psychological warfare within domestic walls. The whole point is to dismantle your social credibility so that if you ever do speak out, no one will believe you. Oh, don't listen to them. You know how they get. It disarms the truth before it's even spoken.
But this is where the rubber really meets the road. It's not just social, it's biological. The source has this section, death by 1,000 invisible cuts. And it turns out, the body keeps score.
This is where psychology and biology just collide. The source makes it clear. The human nervous system cannot distinguish between social annihilation and a physical threat, like a predator hunting you.
Wait, really? So if my family is systematically discrediting me, my body reacts the same way as if I'm being chased by a lion?
Chemically, yes. Your amygdala doesn't know the difference. Chronic emotional abuse keeps your cortisol levels, your stress hormones, constantly elevated. You are in fight or flight for years.
And we know what chronic cortisol does to a body. It's basically poison over time.
It suppresses your immune function. It physically alters your brain structure. It fragments memory. The source lists the results. Autoimmune conditions, depression, dissociation, addiction. It's a neurological reality. The quote that just stands out is, "The body keeps score, not karmically, biochemically."
That is so grounding. It removes all the mystery. You can't gaslight a blood test. You can't argue with an autoimmune disorder that's the direct result of years of hypervigilance.
Exactly. It validates the victim's experience in a way that words sometimes can't. It's the proof the violence was real, even if there were never any bruises.
So we have the how and the what. What about the why? Why do people build these systems? What's driving the dominant figure?
The source calls it the power illusion. People do this because they believe it will get them what they want: control, status, wealth. But the real drivers are internal.
Yeah.
Narcissistic grandiosity, magical thinking, just this desperate need for control.
It also mentions an ego trap.
Yes, and that's key. The deeper you go into the lie, the harder it is to ever back out. Your ego cannot handle admitting you were wrong, and your fear can't handle the exposure of what you've done, so you just double down. It's not some external evil, it's an unrestrained ego that's terrified of being ordinary or wrong.
Which leads to this idea of sowing and reaping. And again, the source strips the theology right out of it. It's not about divine punishment.
It's about feedback loops. It's
Yeah.
just cause and effect. If you sow chronic deception, you're going to reap paranoia. You can't trust anyone because you know how easy it is to lie. If you sow secrecy, you reap isolation. You build a wall to keep people out, and you end up trapping yourself inside.
And intergenerational trauma is a part of that reaping process, I assume.
Absolutely. The source says unresolved harm just gets passed down. Stress responses replicate. Behavioral patterns repeat. The universe, in a way, just reflects the system back at you. As the text says, no thunderbolt required. The punishment is built into the act itself.
Okay, we've painted a pretty grim picture here, but the source doesn't just leave us in the problem. It talks about breaking the pattern. So if you're the asset, the scapegoat, how do you get out?
The single most powerful disruption, according to Ali, is one word: refusal.
Refusal to do what?
Refusal to participate in the silence. Refusal to normalize the harm. And refusal to trade your integrity just for a sense of belonging. It's that moment you finally say, I am not an asset, I am a person.
That sounds heroic, but in practice, that must be unbelievably difficult.
Oh, it is. The source is clear that leaving these systems feels like the ultimate betrayal. You've been conditioned to feel that way. But it reframes it not as betrayal, but as reclamation. And the actionable steps are things like separation, documentation, therapy, and sometimes legal action. It's not just walking away. It's untangling your own nervous system from theirs.
And what happens to the whole system when that pawn, that scapegoat, finally walks off the board?
It destabilizes. Not because of magic, but because the leverage point is just gone. If the scapegoat refuses to carry the blame anymore, the blame has to go somewhere. It bounces right back onto the system. The members might even turn on each other. When you take away the silence, you take away the currency.
A structural collapse.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Without the asset, the market fails. The dominant figure loses their supply, and the enablers are forced to finally look at the reality they've been avoiding.
This deep dive has really changed how I think about family dynamics. It's not just about getting along. It's about power and currency and structural integrity.
It forces us to ask a really uncomfortable question about our own lives. Is our loyalty based on love, or is it based on leverage? Are we connected by real affection or by a shared secret?
And to wrap it all up, the source brings us back to this idea of the dangerous norm.
It does. The final thought is that the most dangerous norm isn't some big dramatic evil. It's indifference. It's the moment a family decides that one person's well-being is expendable to protect the family's image. Families can be sanctuaries, or they can be marketplaces. And the difference is simply whether people are loved for who they are or valued for what they provide.
No one sells their soul, but people can abandon their conscience. That is the line that's going to stick with me.
And conscience abandoned always returns, not as punishment, but as consequence.
That is a lot to process, but so incredibly important. We want to thank you for listening to this deep dive into the mechanics of human connection and control.
It's a heavy topic for sure, but understanding the architecture is always the first step to remodeling the house.
Absolutely. Take care of yourselves.